Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. I am super excited, not only because we're talking about e-filing, which is a really exciting topic, but look at this panel. I am so impressed and absolutely honoured to be on this webinar with all of you. So, on that note, shall we briefly introduce ourselves? Very quickly, my name is Geraldine Kosh. I'm sure I've met some of you before, and I've been on these webinars quite a bit, so I won't spend too long introducing myself, and I will move firstly to Elliot.
Thanks, Geraldine, and thanks, Kenny, for having us. We're thrilled to be here and to discuss this very timely topic with you all. My name is Elliot Kay. I'm a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of Cooley. I spent most of my career in the United States government. What is relevant to this webinar is that I was the chairman of the CPSC during the Obama years when a lot of this e-filing effort got kicked off, and managed that for many years, and I'm pleased to speak on that topic tonight.
Great, thank you so much. And Matt.
All right, so Matt Hauser, I'm a partner also in Cooley's Washington, D.C. office. I've been doing product safety and compliance in private practice for basically my whole career, except for 4 years when I was at the CPSC as the chief of staff at the agency. Also dealt with e-filing to a lesser extent during that period than when it was really kind of got going under Elliot at the CPSC. But have been working with clients on the private practice side through the alpha pilot, through the beta pilot, through the voluntary compliance program, or the voluntary undertaking program. So it kind of seen a lot during that time, and happy to be chatting with everybody, 9 days before the effective date of the rule. So looking forward to this panel.
Thank you so much, Matt. And finally, last but not least, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Geraldine. So Ken Henson, I'm currently president of ICW North America. Excuse me. Prior to that, I held a few senior compliance roles with Walmart and QVC Group for the better part of about 12 years, helping develop and lead those product safety and compliance programs. Prior to that, I was for a little more than 3 years executive director of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, where I worked closely with both Elliot and Matt during that time. And then I practiced law for about 8 years prior to that, dealing with products and products liability and that sort of thing as well. So that's me. And I do want to say, as kind of the host of this webinar, I want to start the whole session by saying how honored and delighted I am to have Elliot and Matt here with us. It really is a coup for us. These are two true giants in the industry. If you don't know them, you probably know about them, or you've been impacted by something they've done in this field. And so it's a real honor to have my two friends here with us today, and I'm so appreciative of their time and carving out a bit of it to spend with us. So thank you both for that.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I'm sure you'll agree with that experience. We're in the right place, right? So any questions that you have about e-filing, and I know the date is coming up soon, but please do put it in the Q&A function of the chat function that we have here, the Q&A function, or you can contact us after. We've only got 45 minutes to get all of these questions in, so we don't have a lot of time, but we will be following up with you after if we don't get to answer your questions today. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have. But I'm going to start with my questions. So, Elliot, so you're the former chairman of the CPSC, as you've explained, and you had a role that everyone else was explaining as well when the e-filing was coming about. So I want to start with you. So our colleagues on this webinar have hopefully heard about e-filing by now and may know what's required. But from your perspective, what is e-filing, practically speaking, and why is it so important?
Thanks, Geraldine. So from the agency's perspective, which I'm going to speak to because I think a lot of companies are trying to understand the why behind this, and is this something that is really going to be useful and necessary, even though Congress had given us the authority to add e-filing as a capability to the CPSC's data collection. It took a long time really for the agency to have the bandwidth post CPSIA to turn to e-filing. prior to e-filing, as everybody knows, of course, certificates have been required, and the data elements have been embedded in those certificates, but only upon request has that really been an issue when the CPSC has asked for that information. And we started to realize during Kenny's time and Matt's time that the data was really sitting there dormant and could be used as an enforcement tool to be much more efficient for the agency. And why that matters, I think, for a lot of people on this call, is that the agency has always driven to create clearer lanes for compliant trade, and so that its energy could really be focused on non-compliant actors. And so we began, as Matt referenced, an alpha pilot, happened under me in the 2015 timeframe, to really begin to kick the tires onto how to do this. But the goal all along was to get to a point that I think we're about to see, where the agency really could use its enforcement tools in a much more strategic way, be more data driven, and provide an easier path for compliant trade, not to be hung up in the risk assessment that the agency is doing at the ports.
Yeah, thank you for that. So it's not just something that's for customs, it's something bigger than that, right?
I think it is, because for the CPSC, a lot of the resources have to be, it's obviously a tiny agency, as folks around the space know, it really has to be very efficiently applied. And so with the development of the risk assessment methodology and the port work that we do in tandem with customs, or the agency does in tandem with customs, this e-filing program really allows for much more efficient targeting, much more direct targeting, and really they don't share what the factors are that create the risk profile, but you can imagine it involves companies of concern, suppliers of concern, repeat offenders, areas of the world of concern, certain regulatory violations that are a higher risk, especially affecting children. And so the ability for the agency to really target that much more effectively off of the data that's going to be preloaded into certificates will make a big difference for the agency's enforcement actions. But again, for the trade, it should allow for more flow through the ports for compliant actors.
Yeah, I understand that. And here, so I'm based in the UK. I live in London, and the authorities here, the enforcement, they have so much to do. It's just to try and help them prioritize, and that's really interesting. Thank you. So, Matt, I'm going to move on to you now, if that's okay. So, I know that you spend a lot of time, I'm sure you spend a lot of time working with Elliot, working with the amazing Cooley team, advising product companies on various parts of safety and compliance. So, I assume that you've received a few questions about e-filing. Based on these conversations, do you think companies are ready?
I think it's a wide spectrum of readiness, and there are companies that don't even know that they have products that fall within the filing requirements. To those companies that have been not just participating in the voluntary program, but doing it at scale, and are working out all of the kinks. And so I think that in terms of readiness across the board, I think that there's a general readiness. But come day one, there's going to be a lot of folks or a lot of companies that are working out the kinks. And that's just a natural part of the process. That's something that the CPSC has emphasized, that they are looking at those who are trying to comply, and those that are making an attempt, versus those who are doing nothing at all. And so I'd say it is a wide spectrum. Some companies you would expect to be all on top of it are nowhere near as far along as you would expect, and some companies that are smaller and more nimble, who you wouldn't necessarily expect to be on top of it, have it all figured out, and have worked out a lot of the kinks. And so I think it's across the board, but I think most importantly from the agency's standpoint, those that are coming in with products that match HTS codes that the agency is tracking, that have zero filing whatsoever and don't have anything to say if and when flagged, as to what they're doing and how they're trying to do it. Those are the companies I'm most worried for, in terms of, one, not being ready generally, and two, how that becomes kind of a cascading failure at the ports in terms of feeding into the risk assessment methodology and all of that that Elliot was talking about earlier, and that being a problem that just really compounds itself because if you've got one shipment that's problematic, then all the rest behind it potentially are too. So those are all things to think about here. But I think that the biggest thing is companies having their data in order, their certificates in order, and that it really varies a lot.
And Geraldine, if I could just jump in quickly, because I saw we already had a question about this, which is basically a company was trying to reach the CPSC email box and was not getting a response. And I wanted to answer that early because this is a common refrain we've heard. And Matt and I can definitely help with that. We know the right staff to talk to. It should be a pretty easy connection to make that happen and a light touch on our part, but we would encourage folks who are having trouble. And as these days get to the last moments and the staff is under a tremendous crush, we're happy to reach out and to get companies connected with the right staff so that they can get their e-filing questions answered.
That's amazing. And thank you for addressing that question. And I'm sure if you go to the Cooley website, you'll find your information. But of course, we will give you the information after this webinar. We'll send it out to you and you can contact us. So thank you so much for that, Elliot. That's really helpful. Really appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to ask Ken a question now. And Ken, I am absolutely honored. You're a colleague of mine now at ICW. Yeah. It's super exciting. And your career has spanned so much. You've got legal, government, retail, and now compliance technology. So you've seen it from all angles. What do you think the biggest operational adjustment companies are having to make if they want e-filing to work well?
Yeah, I think they have to change their mindset as it comes to how they manage product compliance data. I think historically, and Elliot touched on this, talking about kind of the dormant data. I think historically companies have managed compliance data as archival information, right? It was this parallel process. You'd run whatever compliance verification checks you had, and you would store that compliance data somewhere, either in an internal database or perhaps even a third-party lab or some other third party might kind of house that data for you. And in the very rare instance that CBP or the CPSC asked you for that information, you would scurry about and try to retrieve it and get it to the CPSC in a timely fashion. Like this e-filing rule turns that on its head, right? Companies have to like actively manage their compliance data now. That data has to be in real time associated with item information, with customs entry information, on a recurring basis, right? This is every time you're making an import entry, and you have to do it at scale. CPSC is a small agency, but its jurisdiction is broad, right? It covers a lot of different items. It regulates a lot of different items. And so, for those regulated items, companies have to build a process where they can manage their data reliably, consistently at scale to ensure that their items are delayed at port, aren't refused entry, and that their risk score is not impacted by inadequate or insufficient customs filings, e-filing information. And so that I think is really the big challenge for companies, and those who have maybe delayed their reaction to this rule, delayed kind of process improvements and things like that, I think are going to find it's a big lift. I think the work that has to be done to comply with this rule is a lot harder than people intuitively think, right? But the rule itself is pretty simple, right? It's the execution that's really difficult.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that I'm going to have to plug it now. But I think the ICW system and systems like that really help. It's the whole admin and the files, the technical, but everything associated with it. If you have it all neat and tidy in one place, it makes it easier. But yeah,
that's right.
It's a challenge, a big challenge.
That's right.
Geraldine, one question from our good friend Al Kaufman in the chat here, asking about the agency making programmatic changes with the interface with ACE, and if that's going to create day one issues, and if there's going to be any sort of delay for launch. Just jumping in on that, I think that there's of course going to be day one issues. There's no question. There's going to be day one. There's going to be week one. There's going to be week two as kinks get ironed out in the system on the agency side. And quite frankly, most of what I've seen has been on the client side, in terms of getting kinks worked out, making sure that data is being entered the right way, especially if you're using the API. It's not, it's almost like programming code, to be totally honest, in terms of what that takes. But I foresee, and Elliot and Ken can jump in as well. I foresee absolutely zero changes in launch, regardless of the kinks that need to be worked out.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
agree.
agree. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Elliot.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We spent years working with CPP on ACE and the integration and the single window. So that part doesn't concern me now. I just think that because there are a lot of different ways that companies can try to comply with this, there's been a good amount of confusion that companies will do different things that may or may not work with the system. And they might find out the hard way that their attempted approach, as earnest as it was, may not be fully effective. One example I can give quickly is one of my clients was trying to upload a significant amount of certificate data in the last week and was just genuinely confused as to how to do the system properly. And they had their access cut off because it was overwhelming the CPSC system. We had to work through those kinks, and I just think that's going to happen, as Matt said, in the opening period.
And I was just going to say, from an operational standpoint, right? In my experience with large companies, I mean, when you build big tech projects like this, you get to the point where you have what's an MVP. It's called a minimally viable product, and you just got to launch, right? And you learn a lot after launch, and you try to then adjust, and change some code or whatever you need to do. But like, you can only learn so much in a sandbox, and at some point, you just kind of have to rip the band-aid and launch and see what happens. And I think that's where we are. So I agree. I don't see any delay. I think they just have to rip the band-aid and see what happens.
Yeah, great. And thank you for taking those questions. I love it. This is just fun working with you guys. You're doing my job for me. It's great. So we'll keep an eye on the questions coming in and try and address those as much as we can. So please do keep them coming in. But I want to ask a question to all of you. I'm going to start with Elliot, then Matt, and Ken. But what do you think the one thing companies are underestimating in regards to e-filing? You've already given some insight already into that, but do you think there's anything that you haven't mentioned?
Yeah, thanks, Charlene. The acting chairman, Peter Feldman, my former colleague and current friend, is dying to enforce off of this. Dying. He wants to enforce day one. He wants to shut the ports down for any companies that don't have their e-filing straight on day one. Thankfully, the import surveillance staff is taking a slightly different approach and wants to give companies a number of months to work out the kinks, well-intentioned companies. But it's interesting to see that sort of tension within the agency over how this will be enforced and the timeline for that enforcement.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the in terms of the things that just are underestimated, it is, and people aren't appreciating, and we heard it early on, and we continue to hear it. It just continues to be something that is a common refrain. Is you have to marry up the product safety and compliance function with the trade function internally, with the IT team internally. And these are teams that do not work together often, and aren't used to working together. And one of the biggest problems we've seen is whose responsibility is it? Right? Who's got this responsibility? Whose workflow is it? Who's got the KPIs associated with it, whatever it may be, who's got the budget for it? These are all operational questions, that have much less to do with compliance than the data, and much more to do with building a process internally that brings those teams together, and does it in a way that demonstrates compliance to the agency. So I think that the internal coordination has been, in my experience, and the need for it, and the need to assign accountability and ownership has been one of the biggest things I've seen.
Yeah, interesting. Ken?
Yeah. So being kind of beyond the data issues, and and a lot of my career I've spent in the retail space, in the marketplace space. So from that perspective, I think probably the thing a lot of retailers or marketplace hosts are underestimating is the readiness of their suppliers and 3P sellers. A retailer may import a lot of goods, but there's a lot of goods they sell that they don't import. And a common retailer may have thousands of suppliers with varying levels of sophistication. And then, if you host a 3P marketplace, I think, exponentially more concern you should have. A lot of your sales on the 3P on your marketplace are 3P. A lot of your profit is 3P. And if your 3P sellers who are responsible for usually for importing their own goods are not ready, you're going to have a lot of unsatisfied customers, right? Where they place an order on your platform from a third party seller, and it's not delivered, or it's delayed, or whatever the case may be. And so, regardless of how prepared a retailer or a marketplace host might believe they are, if their supplier base and their 3P seller base is not equally as prepared, it could have a very real customer impact. And as Elliot was saying, I think the chairman is ready to go on this, right? And so, these aren't necessarily theoretical or, X years out type of issues. I think as soon as they can, they're going to start holding things at port. And the more a 3P seller or any importer is non-compliant or doesn't have their data in an order that satisfied CPSC requirements, the higher their risk score will likely go, and the more likely they are to continue to be held. And so you just kind of get into this doom loop if you're not careful. So I think that's something companies, particularly retailers, are grossly underestimating.
Yeah, this is so interesting. And I think some of the things you're talking about are common in product safety and compliance generally, right? You've got problems with silos, you've got problems with communication, you've got problems where people think, oh, it'll just go away, or they've been talking about it for so long. Is it, when's it going to happen kind of thing? But this is happening and it's real. So we do definitely need to make sure we're ready for it. So I've heard data mentioned quite a few times. I love data. I love some of the data sources that the CPSC have, but how significant is the data integration challenge? You've already alluded to some of these, but if there's any that you've missed when you were talking, Ken, do you think there's anything else?
No, I think that's the key for companies. Again, like the rule itself is not complicated. Unfortunately, I think many companies, many importers almost view this as like a testing and certification rule, asking questions about what has to be like that rule is old, right? The testing and certification requirements have existed for a long time. And so, from a pure regulatory standpoint, from a pure compliance standpoint, it's not that complicated, right? You should already have this data. Now you just need to give some of that data to CPSC at import, and everything should be good, right? No, right? It's really hard. So I really do think data is where the companies are going to struggle, because that data, the testing data you have that's likely living in a siloed system somewhere has to be associated with the item, has to be associated with factory information, has to be updated, right, with new production runs, or as annual testing requirements need to be fulfilled on a recurring basis, has to be tied to the HTS codes and your custom information, and it all has to be ready at the time that you submit your product for entry. And so that's a real challenge for companies, is stringing all that together. And I think a lot of people have had issues with that. ICW certainly has clients that we're helping with that. We do have an auditable, traceable, defensible system that ties all that together, including the connection to the CPSC product registry. So it is kind of a one-stop seamless experience. But if companies don't have a tool like that, or haven't built that tool internally, I think they're really going to struggle making this work. Period, much less at scale.
And I think we're kind of alluding to it now in case people aren't ready. I'm going to come on to that in my next question. But before I get on to that, I just want to ask Elliot, how should industry, or how do we expect the CPSC to use this data? You've alluded to some points, but is there anything additional?
I think that they're going to first, Geraldine, try to clean up what they consider to be lazy companies that have not been getting certificates when they're supposed to. That's the easiest part for them. That's what Peter, the acting chairman, has been dying to do. And so there will be a period of time, I think, where that is the simple enforcement. You either have properly filed or you have not. And when it starts to hurt is when shipments get denied entry. And that will change some behavior. It gets more complicated, though, after that, I have to say. And what I would be concerned about if I were still there is fraudulent certificate data, because it's not going to be difficult for bad actors to upload fraudulent certificate data, and it will be incredibly difficult, I believe, for CPSC to catch that quickly. And what you might end up seeing is a frustrated trade where they're spending tens of thousands, maybe millions of dollars to comply with this, but they feel like bad actors are just uploading fraudulent certificate data. And I think that the trade should hold CPSC accountable to figuring out ways to make sure to sift that data and analyze that data with whatever tools are necessary to focus that enforcement on that fraudulent data.
It's great, very interesting. Thank you. So, Matt, I'm going to ask you a question we've kind of been alluding to, and we've been talking about July 8th. So what do you think a company should do if they realize that they're actually not going to be ready?
Panic. No, I'm just kidding.
What did you say? Did you say panic?
I said I think you should panic. But I think that what you should do is you should get the attention of top leadership within your organization, whatever organization that is, and make sure that they understand the urgency. Because it is something like Elliot was just saying, right? The agency is going to be going after those that are easy targets, and I don't think they're going to wait very long for those that are truly not trying to comply. I think there's a big difference from an enforcement perspective with those that are making attempts at complying and trying to be participatory in the system, but maybe not getting it quite right. And those that are just not doing anything at all, or that are frozen in place, deer in headlights. And so, if you haven't raised this to leadership within your organization, I would definitely recommend it. It is not a voluntary thing anymore, and shouldn't be looked at that way. And so I think that's something that's really kind of important in terms of making sure, just again for your own benefit, that to the extent you're raising this issue internally and it goes unheeded and something happens later and a shipment gets stopped or whatever, from an internal accountability standpoint, nobody can point the finger back at you and say, well, why didn't you tell us about this? Right. Like why was this not raised or raised to the appropriate people or raised to the appropriate level, whatever it may be. And so that is something that I would definitely make sure that you do, and then have a plan that is very risk-based, right? If you're importing toys or nursery products, you're in the target zone in terms of where the agency is going to be enforcing coin sales, things like that, where they're obvious. If you're in an obvious enforcement area, you should, or if you have products that are in those areas, you should be prioritizing them over the others. But that's easier said than done. One of the things, this is kind of all or nothing in terms of the approach. You either have all the data or you have none of it, and you have it correct or incorrect. And so you can talk about phasing it and making a risk base and all of that, but it is one of those things where you tend to not have segments that are good to go and other segments that are not. You in my experience, from what I've seen, it's either all there or mostly there, or it's not, or it's problematic.
I'm going to summarize what you said, and it was panic a little bit. Just try to panic a little bit, but also plan and prioritize. I think that's important. I mean, we only have a little bit of time for planning right now, but we need to to get on it and definitely prioritize and speak to people in your organization, make sure they're aware or they're on top of it. But that's great. Thank you, Matt. Ken, I don't know if you have anything to add, or Elliot, to that.
Yeah, no, I would think a healthy panic is probably good at this point, right? Not a not something that freezes you, paralyzing panic, but a healthy panic. Um, and the other thing Matt said, I think is important is I, alert leadership, right? Let leadership know what's going on. In part because then from a top down, they can help you identify, and we're back to data. They can help you identify where does all the data live, right? Who owns that data? You need to pull all those teams together to work through this because it's likely going to be, your compliance teams. I'm sure your legal team will be involved. You're going to have your sourcing teams. You're going to have your customs import team. It might touch on merchandising some. You're certainly going to have your IT team involved, right? This is a kind of, in many companies, this is going to be a pretty broad a project, pretty broad, swath of teams that are going to have to come together to solve this. And then so once you have that, like you have to build a plan, right? How are you going to manage the data? How are you going to manage the process? As Matt alluded to earlier, who owns it? I mean, even when I was in the retail space, that was always kind of an outstanding question. Is this a customs thing? Is this a product safety thing? Like, who owns it? Who's going to be driving this? Who's accountable for it? I think that's going to be really important. And when you're building the governance for it, like spend time building data governance because so many different teams touch this data, own this data because it lives in so many different places. You've got to have really strong data governance on that and not and don't say, well, my company has, a privacy and data governance policy. Like that's not going to cut it. Like you need something curated specifically for e-filing so that, your customs team doesn't tweak something with their process that suddenly now, your compliance information can't be associated with that item on a one-for-one basis. And because you can really get crosswise there. And like Matt said, one little change, you're not suddenly missing an item, you're suddenly missing everything if you're not careful. So make sure you've got strong governance around that. And then the last thing I would strongly urge companies to do or avoid doing, like in the short term it's okay, but don't settle for manual processes. Like don't try to like force this through with elbow grease. Like that's not sustainable. You can't manage that at scale. You've got to find systems, tools, solutions, automated solutions that can help you not only manage this but then help you have that defensible, traceable, auditable history of how you've managed this. So then even if you get it wrong, like Matt said, you've still got a good story to tell, right? Here's all the things we did to try to comply. We've learned, we'll do better next time. That lands a lot better with CPSC than it does. Sorry, we were trying to manage this with two people and we had, 10,000 entries a month and we just couldn't do it, right? That's not a great story. So, be thoughtful about that approach and make sure you have good data management in place for it.
I'm disappointed because I want to spend longer talking to you guys about this, but just, we spoke, I think supply chain, we've already spoken about, knowing your supply chain, knowing who's responsible. You need to know where your product's from, what's in your product. This has always been, here in the EU, UK, we've been talking about that as well for a while. You need to understand your supply chain. But just talking about data has been mentioned quite a lot. So I just want to ask you, Elliot, if that's okay. Do you see the CPSC use of data evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
I do on the supply chain, actually, Geraldine, in the sense that, as I mentioned, there's a list of factors that affect a company's or a filer's risk profile. And I do believe that the suppliers and any issues the CPSC has flagged with those suppliers do increase risk scores. And so I do believe it's even more incumbent upon companies to really understand who their suppliers are. If they see a recall, for instance, or they see a regulatory violation cited by the CPSC with a similar product to theirs, and they know that those products are probably made in the same places where their products are made, there's a good chance that that recall might end up, or those regulatory violations might end up causing some risk scores to change, which could blow back on the companies using the same suppliers. I'm here in China. We're here every other month, usually It's not easy to come here, but it's really necessary, or wherever Vietnam, Thailand, wherever one supply chains are being run out of, and really have a presence on the ground, because we see with sampling, we see with production over time. It's called quality fade in industry. At CPSC, we call it safety fade. Parts get swapped out, things suddenly change. And again, because of the suppliers getting flagged, it will change the risk scores for the filers, and it could end up causing years of problems. It's not easy to get one's risk score back down once it's high. It takes multiple stoppages by the CPSC and verification that nothing is violative, and again and again and again, before that will start to change the risk score for the better. And no company wants to go through that.
Yeah.
It's like
And
it's
Matt, sorry,
like my
go ahead.
GPA, like my GPA, really hard to get up, but it's really easy to drop, right? So think of it that way if that's helpful.
No, great. Um, okay, so if companies accept this kind of future oversight and enforcement is likely to become increasingly data driven, which I think is great. There is so much data, we need to be able to use it. How do you think that should influence how we think about compliance and risk management? Like, both Ken and Matt, but firstly, Matt, what do you think about that?
I think that when it comes to risk management, the the data being inaccurate or just incomplete, whatever it may be, that's something that and as you're looking at that again, I would prioritize higher risk categories than lower risk categories in terms of how you're doing that. But I think that there's a real risk there in the sense that that you're really kind of flirting with disaster in terms of that it's like a snowball rolling down the top of a hill, right? It's going to get bigger and bigger in terms of the issues, the increased scrutiny on the company. And so I think to the extent that you are getting flagged or something is incomplete, or the agency is saying that they're asking for your information and finding issues or finding problems with it. That should be a panic mode, right? Not a panic frozen in place mode, but that is like all hands on deck. We're getting this question from the agency and we're not quite ready to answer it. And I think that you are putting yourself in that situation, and the likelihood of that situation occurring as time goes on, if you're not addressing things and addressing them again, and just look at it from the way the agency would look at it in terms of priorities. So I think that's something that just with the goal of like eliminating those and getting them out of your system as quickly as possible during this time frame. That should be everybody's priority.
Great, thank you, Matt. And Ken, what do you think compliance programs will look like? How will they differ?
I think there'll be like good compliance programs, successful compliance programs. I think they'll be vastly different, than many are today, or at least as I perceive many to be today. Companies, as I've kind of already alluded to, some spend a lot of time chasing documentation right now, right? They run their verification program, the information stored somewhere, and then in the rare instance that they have to retrieve it, that CPSC requests that information, they scurry about and they go find it. Like that's a recipe for failure. Like now, much less 5 years from now, you really have to have an integrated compliance process, just as you do a merchandising process, a buying process, an import product. Like it has to be part of your internal operations, not a parallel function anymore. And you just have to. It has to be integrated, and you have to have systems, tools capable of doing that integration for you. And it's a mind shift. right? I mean, I think e-filing and the broader shift of a data, based decision making that it represents, I think it's similar to when CPSIA was passed, right? Completely changed the industry. I think you're going to see that again right now. I think we're starting to see the industry change again. And if you watch the industry change and you wait to update your compliance programs based on that change, you're already too late. And has already been said, it's not just going to impact your ability to enter one item. Like if you as an importer, if your risk score is elevated, you're going to be working hard for a long time to get that risk score back down. And so it has enterprise impacts. Even, single items now can have enterprise impacts, whereas previously they didn't. So I would encourage everybody. It may not even be update your compliance program. You may just need to like whiteboard, right? Start over. Think of it completely differently than you thought of it in the past because it's a different world now.
Yeah, it's like a culture shift for the organization. Sorry, Elliot, go ahead.
So can I just jump in on one more thing over the next 5 to 10 years? And this just goes back to the thinking that we had at the agency in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, which was we didn't view the import side as the final step in the collection of data and the analysis of data. Ultimately, the holy grail was not the regulatory side of the house, it was the defect side of the house. And there really is not great data, or at least common data, like there is on the regulatory side. But what I expect to happen, depending on how CPSC approaches this, is a lot of the methodologies that they developed to scan this data and analyze this data could be applicable to one day bringing that type of approach to the defect side. And everything that Kenny and Matt are talking about for companies that are able to anticipate that are going to put those companies in a much better place because sort of like the movie Minority Report, ultimately the CPSC would love to identify defects before they happen and to approach those companies and prevent injuries from occurring before recalls have to happen.
It's really interesting. Thank you. So I can only ask one more question to all of you, and that's going to be what's the one recommendation you leave attendees with today? So can I start with you, Elliot?
Sure. I think that the common theme we've had is that if you have not gotten yourselves ready, we encourage whatever it takes at this point to really get there. I would also say that I know we've seen a lot of the questions of frustrations trying to engage with the staff. I'd keep at it. I think this is why there's going to be this period of months of hopefully the staff working through these issues. But I would not just give up and wait for them to come calling. I don't think that's the posture companies want to have. I would continue to try to create a record of trying to reach them and ultimately reaching them to work through these issues and get these technical issues fixed.
Thank you. And I'll ask you, Matt, but I just want to mention one thing that I think is inspirational. So someone that was having difficulty logging in has actually managed to log in now. So you've been inspirational. I think that's great. Matt, what's your one thing?
So one thing I would say, if you haven't done this, if those who are in the, because I think most of the companies on this webinar are probably already trying, right? And they're in a good spot, would be my guess. I would say that the biggest thing that I have seen is and Elliot actually gave an example of it earlier, is most of the little critters come running out when you try and do this quote unquote at scale. And so if you haven't done an at scale launch yet and you're waiting until January 9th or January 8th to do that, you can see a lot of things potentially come out then. And so I would scale up now. If you haven't already and you're waiting on something to do it, just go ahead and do it because that has been when I've seen the most things kind of pop out and go wrong. I do see one question here about the SKU code must match the product ID. It doesn't. The product ID can be one of like 7 different identifiers, of which the SKU code is one. So there's 7 different possibilities there, but just wanted to answer that one real quick. Sorry.
Thanks,
go ahead.
That's great. No, I love it. I love the question. Answering the questions is great. Ken, what's the one thing from you?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to what Matt said. Like I think most of you probably don't have a major compliance program. You're trying hard to do the right thing, and in many instances you probably are. but many of you, or so, at least some of you, probably have a data management problem, right? And that's what we spent a lot of this webinar talking about. And eventually, like very soon, as Matt said, July 8th is coming, like what we say, 9 days, I think. Eventually, that's going to become a compliance problem if you're not managing your data well at scale. And so, if you haven't already, you need to invest in that data quality. You need to invest in that data integration, automation, where everything can be tied together. You can e-file at the right time with the right information, and you have that auditable, defensible, traceable information chain, that data chain, all tied together. And again, and the other thing I would say related to that is, like, don't think of e-filing, kind of as the end all be all, right? I really do think this is a sea change in where this industry is moving. And so companies that more quickly learn and effectively manage their data, I think will be prepared for whatever comes next. Like Elliot said, it could be predictability around defects or other things. Like, this is going to continue to evolve. And as companies, the more you invest in that data now, the better prepared you'll be for whatever comes next.
That's great. Thank you so much. This is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all your questions. I know we haven't got to all of them. I will make sure that we do get to those. ICW and Cooley are here to support you. Getting to know these guys and having these conversations has been really helpful. I think a little bit of healthy panic if you're not there by July 8th, because the CPSC are waiting and they're going to be ready on July 9th. So please do plan and prioritize and ask us if you have any questions. There will be a questionnaire that pops up when we finish today. Please complete that. It really helps us understand what questions or thoughts you have about these webinars. So we really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Ken, Matt, and Elliot. What an absolute honor to spend the last 45 minutes with you.
Likewise.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.